In the 21st century, it's hard to imagine there are places on Earth that are still inaccessible to humans. However, there are more than 500,000 islands on our planet, many of which are still poorly explored or uninhabited. And in this video we will talk about 10 unusual islands that are impossible to get tourists. Surtsey Island, Iceland. This island is located only 30 kilometers from the coast of Iceland. Its peculiarity lies in the fact that it was formed as a result of eruptions in 1963 to 1967, and since then the island has been protected. Since the island has not been subjected to human activity, it provides an opportunity for world science to study the formation of new ecosystems in real time. Over the years, scientists have been able to see the emergence of vegetation, fungi and molds, whose seeds and spores were carried by ocean currents. Then birds began to inhabit the island, at first only as a stopover for migration, but the more vegetation became available, the more often some species recognized Surtsey as their home. And then seals began to establish mass haulouts on the coast, attracting killer whales to the island as well. The only human-made structures on the island are a hut for scientists, as well as a weather station and a webcam to observe the new ecosystem. Heard Island, Australia. This island belongs to an entire archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean. Their rocky shores and cold climate are not suitable for human habitation. However, Heard Island is not only unsuitable, but also dangerous, because it is nothing but the top of an underwater volcano that lurks for the time being. And it is the only volcano that is active today on the territory of Australia. Coincidentally, the island has also become the highest point belonging to modern Australia. Yes, the island belongs to that very dry and hot Australia, and it is completely covered with ice. Despite the danger and ban on visiting the island, people still sometimes appear there, for example, for filming movies. In addition, there is also a single building on Herta, a weather station, which was in operation from 1947 to 1954. Today it is abandoned and deserted, just like the whole of Heard Island. Queimada Grande, Brazil. But if volcanic islands can be called safe, then Queimada Grande is a real island of death. And it's not because of the climate. It's all about its inhabitants, poisonous snakes. The small island is located in the Atlantic Ocean, 35 kilometers from the coast of Brazil, and looks like a paradise for vacation. Clear water, lush greenery, and the complete absence of tourists. However, the concentration of poisonous neighbors great, a couple of snakes per square meter of the island, that you can relax for exactly a couple of minutes before you get a lethal dose of poison. There is a legend that in the lighthouse, which is located on the island, used to live a keeper with his family. But one day snakes crawled into their house, and they simply could not escape their invasion and died from their bites. Whether it's a fairy tale or not, knows for sure, but it's not hard to believe. This is why Queimada Grande is closed to tourists. However, you can look at it from the water and, if you keep your distance, even fish and dive. UN Buffer Zone, Cyprus, and sometimes your neighbors seem to be people, but thanks to their actions, a part of the island of Cyprus was closed for visits. Generally, Cyprus is a resort island full of life and entertainment, but since it became a stumbling block between the countries of Greece and Turkey, the island is divided in half between these two countries. The buffer zone, or as it is also called, the Green Line or Attila, divides into two parts: the city of Nicosia, which was once the ancient capital of Cyprus. The borders of this zone are protected by UN peacekeeping forces, and it is simply forbidden to live near this zone. And since the border appeared relatively recently, after the armed conflict between the countries in 1974, Nicosia has turned into an abandoned ancient city, in which there is not a soul, and it is simply impossible for ordinary tourists to get there. But to become a closed territory, it is not necessary to be the cause of the conflict between the two countries. The Hawaiian island of Niihau Island is owned by the Robinson family, who once bought the island for $10,000 and have tried their best to preserve the local culture by closing it to tourists since 1915. There is no telephone service, no cars and no paved roads on Niihau. As transportation, The locals use horses and bicycles for transportation. Solar panels provide the entire population with electricity, although there is no such thing as running water. On the island, people sustain their lives by growing their own fruits and vegetables, fishing and hunting. Since only about 150 people live there, they work mostly on the Robinson Ranch, the owners of the island. Although it's off limits, you can buy invitation from a local Hawaiian or the Robinson family. You can see the island on a boat or helicopter tour, but you can't go ashore. North Sentinel Island, India, but far from always keeping the culture of the locals looking friendly. Sometimes it becomes a deadly and dangerous endeavor, as in the case of an Indian island still inhabited by Aborigines from the Stone Age. The first wild island horror stories shocked the world, back in the 19th and 20th centuries, but creepy stories are still happening today. In 2018, American John Chow traveled to the Aboriginal island to convert its inhabitants to Christianity. He made several attempts to get to the island, in the first of which the locals kicked him out, but in the second of which they had already simply killed him by shooting him with bows. This story made a lot of noise and the whole world became interested in the history of the island. However, as it turned out, no one knows anything about it. No one knows what language the locals speak and how many of them live on the island, and the locals themselves have no idea what kind of world surrounds them, so they consider it hostile. People have disappeared off the coast of the island, who accidentally strayed too close to the wild tribe's territory. The latest high-profile case was the story of two fishermen who went crabbing to the shores of Sentinel Island. Without further ado, the locals killed the fishermen, and when a police helicopter came to pick up their bodies, they simply pelted it with spears. Henceforth, the territory of the island and the surrounding area is under India's ban on visitation. Therefore, the island was and remains the most mysterious and closed territory in the world. North Brother Island, USA, an island doesn't have to be inhabited to terrify people. In 1880, a large hospital was opened on North Brother Island, almost in the center of New York City, to treat the most dangerous and contagious diseases: typhus, smallpox, leprosy, and scarlet fever. And for many years, entry to the island was strictly forbidden as long as the hospital existed. It functioned until the 1930s, and then was converted into a rehabilitation center for teenage drug addicts, but this center lived only until 1963, after which it was hastily closed without explanation. Since then, the hospital has become a wild island with not a single person on it, although there is no official ban on visiting today. Blame it on the scary stories that on the island you can still catch a deadly disease or meet the undead souls of the dead. However, there are always daredevils willing to risk their lives to visit the island. So there was a photographer, Christopher Payne, who in 2008 visited the island and made a lot of spectacular shots of the empty hospital walls. However, not many people dare to visit the island until now. The island of Poveglia, Italy. But you know what could be even more scary and secretive than an abandoned hospital on an island? An abandoned mental hospital on an island. Today, the small island and the building of the mental hospital are under a strict ban on tourists. The history of the island was originally not so gloomy. It was inhabited by people since the 5th century, but in the 14th century during the war, the locals had to move to a neighboring island, destroying Poveglia, so that it did not get to the enemies. After the war ended, for some reason no one returned to the island, and from then on everyone began to avoid it. In the same 14th century in Italy came the plague, and the island became one big infirmary and at the same time a tomb for the plague. Moreover, not only the sick were brought to the island, but also the bodies of those who died of the plague, as well as those who were just under suspicion of plague infection. This infirmary existed until the 19th century, but in 1922 on the island opened a hospital for the mentally ill, in which, according to rumors, over the patients were conducted terrible and cruel experiments, after which they died. Doctors and patients were constantly hearing voices within the walls of the hospital, where lobotomies were performed live. And in 1968, the hospital was closed after the mysterious death of its chief physician, who strangely fell out of a tower window. Since then, people have left the island, leaving only an empty hospital, a church and a fort. It is simply impossible to get to the island. Gruinard Island, Scotland, the island doesn't have to be a graveyard for the plague and the insane to become off-limits. It just needs to fall into the hands of scientists. Gruinard Island has been used for biological weapons testing since 1942, according to reports, where anthrax was tested. During these tests, scientists discovered that once infected, 95% of people die from anthrax, but that anthrax can remain active for many years. From 1986 to 1990, the so-called cleanup of the island took place, after which scientists declared that Gruinard was inhabitable again. But people were in no hurry to move there. The first to get to the island were archaeologists who found spores of anthrax in the soil during excavations. And most of the scientific community in the world is convinced that the island will not be suitable for human life for several hundred years. There is no official ban on visiting the island from the authorities, but except for a couple of film crews who made documentaries about the history of the island, no one has ever been there. Svalbard, Norway. And we will finish the top of forbidden places not with mysticism and not even dangerous tests, but with a place called Doomsday Vault. On one of the islands of the Svalbard archipelago in Norway, in a rock 150 meters deep, there is a special bunker that stores more than 1 million species of crops from all over the world. The total area of the Svalbard Seed Vault is more than 1,000 square meters, but only the entrance part of the concrete structure can be seen from the outside. Each country has its own compartment in this plant bank for each country. The purpose of this seed vault is to prevent seeds from being destroyed by possible global disasters such as an asteroid impact, nuclear war or global warming. It is difficult to get to the island, and hardly anyone will let you in. But rest assured, the world is ready for the apocalypse. The world is still full of mysterious and forbidden places. We have considered only a dozen of them. In our other video, you can check out a whole list of more of these mysterious places, and if you're interested in this topic, don't forget to put likes and write in the comments whether you want to continue such stories. And we say goodbye, see you in new collections of interesting facts. See you again.